My wife cheated on me once. Once was enough. I'm sure she thought she had everything under control and was very surprised at how I handled it. The development of events was an ordinary story, married for 15 years. Everything became quite boring. We drifted apart, spending time in the same house under the same roof, but in different rooms. She distanced herself from me. At some point, I noticed that we were no longer partners, no longer confidants, no longer lovers. She left too many clues. I did some scouting and did some digging. It turns out that she had an affair, at least emotionally. She started complaining to me. It was normal, and I stopped listening to her complaining and bullying me over the years. Now, with this new evidence, I not only heard her, I listened. She was unhappy with our marriage. She stopped loving me. It was clear to me, if I tried to bring up the topic, that she was wrong, that we could fix our love, that I loved her, and we could rebuild our marriage. She would just distance herself even more from me. She just looked at me, and in her eyes I saw another bridge crumbling between us. To hell with all this, I said to myself, finishing my beer. I replayed our last argument over and over in my head. I was trying to find a way to get her back. After all, she was mine. It seemed to me, I thought to myself, that every time I tried harder and harder to get my wife back, she moved further away from me. I sat up late into the night, letting my wife sleep in our big family bed while I nursed my hurt feelings. Somewhere along the way, my brain turned on, and a new way of thinking burst into me. Why did I argue with her about how she felt? Really, why? At that moment, I realized that everything my wife had told me was true. The truth that I couldn't just ignore or dissuade her from. She was telling me about her feelings, and here I am, arguing with her, telling her that she was wrong, that she didn't really feel those feelings. How stupid was that? How can you tell someone that they are wrong about their feelings? Well, it would have stopped right away. What she felt was what she felt, so why argue about it? So what did I feel? Strange. No, actually it was weird, because when I was sitting on the couch, in the dark thinking about my recent relationship with my wife, I realized that I was unhappy too. I wasn't sure I loved her anymore. I was in love with the idea of still being together and being married to my loving wife, but it wasn't a reality, was it? This eureka moment struck me. It took me a while to put it all together, but now I had a plan of action. Whether it worked or not, I didn't care at that moment, because now I knew that what I was doing and what she was doing wasn't working. What does it mean? The definition of insanity is to try to do the same thing that didn't work, thinking over and over that it would work. I smiled, threw my beer bottles in the trash, and decided to sleep in the guest bedroom. It's all part of the plan. Frank, Linda opened the door to the guest bedroom and flipped the light switch to deprive me of sleep. Why are you sleeping in the guest room? I squeezed my eyes shut against the light. Until my eyes got used to the bright light. I stayed up late. I didn't want to bother you, I said. She looked at me and then wandered into the kitchen for coffee. I'm not a coffee drinker, as I've been blessed with the ability to wake up and be alert immediately. I jumped into the shower and got ready for a confrontation. I had a springy step today. Linda sat across from me in the living room. I was sitting in my usual position on the couch. Linda clenched her fists. She was worried, and I felt that she was preparing to tell me something. Frank, she began. It doesn't work. I feel disappointed and confused, and I don't think I love you anymore. I sat and looked at her. She paused, then continued. Frank, I know we've been together for a long time, but I think we need to get a divorce. The word hung in the air. I smiled when she looked at me nervously. That sounds good, honey, I said. She blinked. Frank, did you hear me? I nodded. Yes, of course. I heard you. You don't feel like everything is working. You don't love me. You want a divorce. I agree. Do you understand? She was worried now. I got up and walked over to her. I knelt down in front of her. Linda, I can't change how you feel. You don't love me. How can I object to this? Can I tell you that you're wrong? No, you don't love me. Well, to be honest, there were many moments in our lives when I didn't love you either. If you feel like you can't live with me anymore, well, again, how can I argue with that? Linda looked at me like I was crazy. However, deep down, I could see that she was nodding at my acute ability to understand that. What she said was true, and she appreciated it. Wait, did you say you didn't love me? What is it? She asked. There have been times like yours. She was a little worried, and all the time she was playing out this little scene in her head. She never expected me to react like this. I loved seeing her emotions reflected on her face. Well, I said, anything else? I have to leave tonight, so I'd like to settle this now if you don't mind. Are you leaving right now? I got up and started putting on my jacket, getting ready to leave. No. Frank, where are you going? I'm leaving. I think I'll go to a few bars. I think I could start looking for someone else instead of you right now. I waved goodbye to her and left her sitting in an armchair with her mouth open. I stopped at the right bar. There, I took a bourbon and sat down at one of the tables away from the crowd. I took out my cell phone and activated another part of my plan. I called my friend from work. Jessica worked with me in my department and was known as the gossip girl of the company. Playing the role of a poor, abandoned husband, I solemnly relayed to her the conversation I had with my wife in particular, how she stunned me by asking for a divorce. The reason I called her, not the real reason, was because I was at the bar, drowning my sorrows in whiskey, and might not come to work the next day. I could hear the wheels turning in her head. Since Jessica and I flirted at work from time to time, and she was lonely. The next thing I remember is that Jessica invited herself on a date with me for the evening on the pretext that she was looking out for me and was the friend I needed while I was in such an emotionally fragile situation. I met Jessica at a bar that I knew my wife and her friends frequented. Was I worried that someone might see me? No. My marriage is apparently over. My wife didn't love me, and to be honest right now, I didn't love my wife Linda either. Jessica looked good. She arrived quickly, beautifully dressed. Maybe she wanted to get to me before anyone had a chance. At least that's what I wanted to believe. But when she saw me, she was a little surprised that my body language and mood didn't match the news that I informed her on the phone. The smile on my face didn't help either. Frank, what's going on? She sat down next to me with a frown on her face. I raised my hand and pointed at my ring finger, which was now exposed. She wants a divorce. That's how she feels. Why should I fight this? I called the waiter over and ordered another one. Jessica ordered her usual Cosmo. Frank, you seem more broken on the phone. Jess, we've been unhappy for a while. I finally realized that maybe I don't love her the way I used to. She wants this divorce from me, so you know what? I'm not going to fight it. Does she want to leave? Good. I'm not going to lie alone, forgotten, and unloved. Jessica took a long sip of her cocktail. She sat and looked at me. Now I realized that I was influencing this woman, whatever my attitude towards it was. I noticed that it confused her. Shall we dance? I didn't wait for her answer. Just grabbed her hand and led her to the dance floor. Frank, what are you going to do? I held her closer to me. I'm going to give her everything she thinks she wants. I'm going to do whatever I want. I want to dance with you right now. Actually, I've been wanting to dance with you for a long time. Now I can do it. She looked into my eyes and smiled. If you're trying to get back at her. I raised an eyebrow. Maybe she clung to me with her whole body. She felt good and warm. That's fine with me, she sighed. We've lost track of time. It was so nice not to have to worry about having to call home to let Linda know when I was coming back. Jessica was funny, smart, and we flirted all evening. She was 100% mine. She knew that. I knew that. But I didn't take her with me. Although it was really nice to know that someone wanted me, my wife hurt my ego and Jessica supported him. Moreover, I would say that Jessica was a more attractive woman than Linda. We kissed in the parking lot of her car. I opened the door for her and smiled. See you at work tomorrow. She nodded. I made it clear that I needed to have some fun right now. And I wasn't going to nail another woman, in my less refined sense, which Jessica understood. I was now looking for someone for myself. I'm sure that by the end of work tomorrow, all the women in the company will know about this. I wish I could tell you that I'm a calm man. But the truth was that I was looking forward to rubbing Linda's nose with it a little bit. Where have you been? Linda snapped at me when I entered the house. She was in bed, but as soon as she heard me come in, she came out to see me. I put my coat in the closet and started undressing before going to bed. I was walking. I said, I told you I was leaving. Why should you? Care? Frank, I was a little worried that you might have done something bad to yourself. I smiled at her. Linda, I know how you feel. It suits me fine. You want a divorce? I'll be happy to give you a divorce. I'm far from forcing you to live a life with someone you don't love anymore. I took my pillow and clothes the next morning and headed to the guest room. Frank. Linda called out to me uncertainly. I stopped, shifting my things to the other hand. What? She looked down. She couldn't look at my face. It's not clear to me. I mean, you don't have to sleep in another bed. Are you suggesting that you sleep in another bed? Will you move out of our bedroom? I didn't want to make it easy for her. She gasped and wiped away a tear. I didn't mean that. I mean, you can share a bed with me. That is, if that's what you want. If you don't want it, well, I think I could move into another room. She was excited. The thought of actually moving out of her bedroom was something she had never expected. She held her breath in fear that I would force her to do just that. I put her out of her misery. Well, this bed is more comfortable. I'll stay here with you if it doesn't cause you too much trouble. Her face brightened. Oh yes, it will be fine. I mean, it's not a problem for me. All right then, I said and threw the pillow back on the bed. She wanted to talk, but I was too tired, and told her to go to bed. We'll have time to talk later. And indeed, by the next evening, 3 more women at work had proposed to me. I even had a friend who gave me his sister's number. She was a widow, and it was difficult for her to find someone to date. I made dates for the coming week with all 4 girls, and also repeated with Jessica. I purposely left tonight free because I had to talk to Linda. We had to figure it out. I suppose she needed to live her life. I returned to the house and ran into Linda. Carol saw you at the bar last night. She said you were with a woman. Who the hell was she? What did you do together? Carol said that you two were very comfortable with each other. I could have exploded at her. I could have yelled at her, called her a cheater for walking, talking to men, neglecting me, moving away from me. But I didn't do it. I smiled and told her that. I would answer her questions after I changed my clothes. She tried to challenge me, but I ignored her and went to change into my home clothes. When I got comfortable, I noticed that Linda was staring at me intently. She was ready for a fight. Her eyes were close to tears, but her body was tense with rage. It was Jessica from the job I work with. I told her. I didn't deny it. I'm sure she thought I was going to start squirming, but I didn't. What did you do together? What is it? She asked accusingly. I looked at her and just said, we were on a date. On a date? She screamed. I nodded and still sat quietly in my seat. You have no right. We're married. What makes you think you can do this? I got up, got a drink from the kitchen, and sat down again. She was still standing, staring at me intently, waiting for my answer. Why should you care? I asked. She stared at me with her mouth agape. We're married. You want a divorce, don't you? She nodded, unsure of her voice. You said you didn't love me, right? I said I'm not in love with you, she corrected me. And I agree with you, Linda. You're not in love with me anymore. So why don't I go and look for love from someone else? You want a divorce. You don't love me. What does that give me? What incentive do I have to stay here with you? She sat down, actually sank into her chair. What will people say? Don't you understand what it looks like? Right now, Carol is talking all over town about my husband dating some cheater. Don't you dare call Jessica a cheater, I growled. She was the perfect lady and I was a gentleman. Last night, she deliberately went on a date with a married man. I call it a cheater. So, I said angrily, getting up and pacing the room in front of her. She is not married. And if she is a cheater, what would you call a married woman who deliberately dates other men? Without her husband's knowledge? Linda stared at me. She couldn't say anything. I've seen how her mind works. How much does he know? She thought in panic. What does this have to do with me? She exploded. I just looked at her. The time dragged on endlessly. I was silent. She saw it in my face. I knew it. Her body began to shake. See, how much do you know? That's enough, I shouted. You see, my dear, this marriage ended when you decided to take me out of the game. I'm not going to cry about it. I'm moving on. I'm going to take care of myself, considering that I don't get support from my wife at home. I got up and went to the kitchen. Dinner was not ready. I decided to do something for myself. She could cook for herself. A little later, she came into the kitchen and watched me finish my dinner. I'm really sorry, she told me. I put the dishes away and turned to her. I'm sorry too. I think you should know that I have plans for the rest of the week, so don't expect me home early. If you prefer, I can sleep in the guest room. She didn't answer me. I went upstairs to go to bed. I decided to sleep in the guest room. I'm sure Linda didn't sleep well. I met Christina after work. She was a sweet blonde, about 35 years old, divorced with 2 children. We chatted over coffee and then did something really stupid. I took her to play laser tag. Laser tag from the English laser. Laser and tag is a command military tactical game, using safe laser weapons and sensors that record hits. Sensors are placed on vests, helmets, or armbands. Yes, it was us, 2 adults against 10 teenagers, who all turned on us and continue to destroy us at the beginning of each game. Christina liked it. I liked sitting and talking to her. After we were killed, waiting for the next game to start. At some point during the last game, we were both killed. We both fell side by side and pretended to be dead. I pulled her to me while we were lying there and kissed her. She kissed me back. Then we had a good dinner and soon I escorted her back to her house, where we kissed goodbye. She said goodbye to me before we moved on to anything other than kissing and made me promise to ask her out again soon. I was expecting another run-in with Linda when I got back, but strangely enough, she was depressed. Hi, she said. I smiled and greeted her while undressing after the date. It looks like you had a good time, she told me. Her emotions were hidden. That's right, thanks for noticing. How was your evening? We talked. For the first time in months, we sat down and talked late into the night. I listened to her and she listened to me. I've never had a bed with anyone else, Frank. I swear to you, she confessed. I kissed several men and shared my thoughts and feelings with Justin at work. He wanted more from me, but I wasn't ready. Linda, I'm sure we're both to blame for this, but even though you didn't actually make love to anyone else, you still tricked me. We were a team. I'm glad you refrained from cheating on me before asking me for a divorce. I really respect you for that. I should have listened to your feelings, but instead I argued with them.
Yes, she agreed.
We sat in silence for a while. Frank, I'm confused right now. I do not know if I want a divorce. I smiled. Let me know when you figure it out. I'm not kicking you out of the house and I'm not going to leave it anytime soon. Frank? I was already up and about to go to bed. Are you still going to date Jessica? Yes, I'm meeting her now and with others too. Do what you want to do. Figure it out. I have to do what's best for me. If we get divorced, well, then it wasn't meant to happen. I went to the guest bedroom. She followed me in and stood in the doorway. Frank? I turned to see her as I was taking off my shirt. Come back to my bed, please. I hesitated. Do you think that's wise? Tears began to flow from her eyes. I don't know. I just want you right now. I held out my hands to her, and she threw herself into them and sobbed. She was confused. She didn't know how to feel. I carried her back to our bed. I hugged her while we fell asleep. Lauren was a good friend of mine. She was a fan, and she and I always talked about the latest TV shows and fan stuff. We were in a neat bar with live music where she couldn't wait to go. But none of her friends or boyfriends were interested. I took her with me that night. It was fun, and although we used to flirt at work from time to time, there was absolutely no chemistry between us. As romantic partners, we had fun, but we were just friends. It was enough for both of us. And I returned home early. I drove up to the house and found a car parked in the driveway. My jealousy reared its ugly head for a moment, but I calmed down and repeated to myself that everything would be as it would be. It doesn't make sense, does it? I learned this from my psychiatrist when I was being treated for fear of flying. Instead of freaking out and shouting to myself, "Oh my God, I'm going to get on a plane," he made me change my tone to an exciting and anticipatory one. "Oh my God, I'm going to get on a plane. I can't wait." It took some practice, but it usually worked in the short term. Not knowing what to expect, I repeated my mantra and opened the door to see Linda sitting and chatting with Carol, one of her friends. "Frank, I didn't expect you to come back so early." "Linda, Carol." I nodded at them. Carol shot daggers at me from her eyes. She didn't say anything. Business ended early, so I came back. "Do you want some privacy?" Linda and Carol exchanged glances, and then Carol got up from the couch. "I have to go now. Linda, I'll talk to you soon." Linda walked Carol to the door. Carol gave me a hostile look, didn't say anything to me, and left. "I'm sorry for barging in. I didn't want to interrupt your evening," I told her. "Don't be silly, Frank. This is your home too. House." When was the last time she or I called this house our home? "Have you eaten?" she asked me. She had leftovers, which she and Carol had obviously shared. I picked at my food while she was cleaning the kitchen. "How are you?" I asked. She sat down. "I'm fine, I think." I invited Carol to talk, but she confused me even more. "How?" "She wanted me to kick you out, change the locks, and divorce your ass." "Hmm. Well, my key is still working, so I take it you didn't have time to call the locksmith." She laughed. "Don't be silly." I had to explain to her that I had asked for a divorce. "After I told you that? What rights do I have over you? I left you, didn't I?" She stared into my eyes. That last part was a question she desperately wanted to know the answer to. I wanted to jump up and allay her fears, to tell her that I still belonged to her. But I didn't do it. I didn't say anything. In the past, my intentions would have alienated her. Maybe this new non-commitment plan will have a different effect on her. Changing the subject, I blew up the audience. "I'm afraid it's bad news. My date for tomorrow night is canceled. Now I'm stuck with concert tickets. Maybe you want to come with me instead." "Of another girl." His face brightened. "Oh, Frank, I would love to. That is, if that's what you want." I shrugged my shoulders. "Well, I can give these tickets to someone at work." "No," she said decisively. I'd be happy to go. Are you happy to come with me?" She blushed and nodded. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Yes," she whispered. I smiled. "It might be fun." I broke the news to Heather. She was disappointed, but that's life in a game called dating. Linda was dressed and ready to go when I picked her up after work. She looked good. She was dressed to impress. I'm pretty sure she was dressed to impress me. I didn't know too much about this band. Heather invited me to go to this concert. So I bought tickets. They were good. Loud. But good. I guess I wasn't surprised when we ran into Heather. I could see that Linda was surprised at how good Heather looked and quickly realized that Heather would be my date for tonight. I apologized to Heather, and she looked at Linda. "Heather, this is Linda." "Linda." Heather was supposed to be my date today, but something happened. Usually when I introduced Linda, I always called her my wife. I decided not to do it this time, and Linda noticed it right away. "Heather, it's so nice to meet you. I'm Mrs. Donaldson." She looked straight into Heather's eyes, and something happened between the two women. Heather was smart enough to apologize and said she would see me at work the next day. Linda was fuming. She grabbed my arm. "Frank, where's your wedding ring?" I shrugged my shoulders. "At home. I took it off after you asked for a divorce. I don't need it anymore." Linda was speechless again. Damn it. I had fun keeping her quiet. "Frank, we haven't divorced yet." I smiled and focused on the music. I went into the bar several times to refill our glasses. Every time Linda watched me like a hawk, every time I was in a bar, some woman would come up to me, and I would chat with her for a bit. I made one laugh, and she even gave me her number. Linda saw it all, but she didn't say anything. I'm not really a ladies' man. I can flirt a little, but I've always been respectful and never pushed anything. After Linda asked me for a divorce, I allowed myself to be free. I found that I had a pretty crude ability to flirt. And now that my restraint was gone, I found that I didn't need to hold back. I wasn't the most handsome guy around, but I always had the ability to be witty. And I found that women seemed to appreciate my humor and candor. Linda saw me in action for the first time in a long time. I think it surprised her, but she must have realized that a long time ago, the same techniques, movements, and flirting captured her heart. Tonight, I think that's what she was remembering. She was silent all the way home. I was silent too. Once inside the house, we began to prepare for bed. Frank, where's your wedding ring? I pointed to the sock drawer in the dresser. She went over and opened it. Reaching out, she grabbed the gold ring and pulled it out. She looked at him, then at me. The weight of the symbol touched her, and her eyes filled with tears. It's yours now, I told her. I think you should throw it away or sell it. She looked at me. What am I supposed to do with him? What is it? She stammered. I think whatever you want. The ring is a symbol of our love for each other, our marriage. At one point, it was a shield, a warning that its owner was unavailable to others. I doubt very much that most people appreciate and recognize what this symbol means. I know that for me, this ring helped me fight off other women. I was hoping your ring would do the same for you, since you've changed your mind about living with me. I don't think I need that symbol anymore to protect me. It only reminds me of what once was. I looked her straight in the eye until she returned my gaze. When the time comes, we'll decide what to do with this ring. I walked over to her and closed her fingers around the gold band. She watched me and took responsibility. Frank? I was just falling asleep when she called out to me. Thanks for the evening. I enjoyed the concert and chatting with you. Apply. I fell asleep again. Breakfast was waiting for me in the morning. Linda made scrambled eggs and bacon. She was an excellent cook, and I appreciated her efforts.
I noticed that Linda hadn't taken off her wedding and engagement rings.
I also saw that she kept fingering them while eating with me. Carol called me at work that morning. Carol, I'm surprised I can hear you. What can I do for you? Lunch today, 12:30 at the Bohemia. She hung up and I stared at the dead headset. I wasn't sure what to expect at lunch. I didn't know Carol very well. Linda became friends with her at work. She was pleasant to look at, but she was never very friendly with me. She was one of Linda's friends with whom they often talked. I walked into the bar that I invited Jessica to that first night. She was already sitting at a table covered with a white linen tablecloth and waved at me. Her face was tense and sharp. It's probably not going to be a pleasant conversation. As soon as I sat down and my order was accepted, Carol glared at me. What the hell are you up to? Linda is in agony and you're pulling this stupid stunt dating other women in front of her? I think I blushed for the first time. It was partly embarrassment, partly anger. I quickly closed my mouth before saying something I would regret later. I immediately realized that everything I said and did at lunch today would be reported to Linda immediately. She watched me as I regained control of my emotions. For a long time I thought about how to answer. Finally, I spoke. Carol, how much do you know about what's going on with Linda? I know that her husband is acting like a complete jerk. She growled. The people around us were looking in our direction. Carol, stop talking nonsense. Answer my question honestly and I'll answer yours. I have nothing to hide in you. Carol swallowed and was glad that our waiter chose this moment to serve us food. I sat and waited. Linda is confused, Carol admitted. So confused that she needs to date other men to sort out her thoughts. Carol blushed and took a sip of water. Linda had some weak points, Frank. I bet, I said sarcastically. We were trying to help her figure things out, Carol replied. You see, my dear Carol, that's where I make an exception. Why are you and your friends responsible for helping her settle the relationship between her and her husband? Carol was silent. In fact, what does it matter to you at all? Linda is my friend. So what? I said. I should be her best friend, her partner, her life partner. Don't you think that if she had any problems, she should have talked to me first? Don't you think she should have come to me to sort things out? Instead, she goes to her friends who are apparently such good and responsible people that they take her to places where she can sort out her feelings with other men. Men who don't seem to care that they kiss another man's wife. Carol turned a little pale. No, she turned very pale. She didn't seem to have much appetite right now. Somehow Carol opened the floodgates of rage in me. It was another stupid, just a friend who decided to stick her nose in other people's business. Let me ask you something, Carol. Are you married? She shook her head. Have you ever been married? Another wiggle. Do you have a degree in counseling? No. So what gives you the right to give someone advice about marriage? You've never been married, so how do you know what it is? What gives you the right to manipulate someone else's marriage? She gasped. But I'm her friend. Not from where I'm sitting. How many times have you talked to me? Once or twice as far as I remember. I've been married to Linda for 15 years now. But when have you ever found time in your life to meet, talk, and get to know your friend's man and partner? I've been in her life for 15 years, so I know her like no one else. You're talking about advice. You're talking about helping her get through this. But what the hell do you know about me other than what Linda told you from her point of view? I felt that Carol was about to cry. I reached out to her as well as I could now to get a message. To her and through her to Linda. Carol, Linda told me how she felt. She wanted a divorce. She told me, and I quote, I don't love you anymore. Well, Carol, tell me, how should I react to this? What possible argument can I give her to say that she is wrong? Well, she wanted a divorce. Why should I be unhappy hoping that she will change her mind? I finished my drink. My meal was half eaten, but I was already done. I stood up and took one last look at Carol. I found that other women see something in me. My wife doesn't see it anymore. She pushed me away. I didn't push her away. I'm not going to cancel my life because my partner is confused and doesn't want me anymore. I'm trying to move on. How she feels about it is her own business. I'm not trying to convince her anymore and tell her how she should feel. Now I can accept it. With that last statement, I left before Carol could say anything else. I knew that as soon as I left the restaurant, she would be on the phone with Linda. At that moment, I had a lot to think about. I was going to meet Janet this evening. Everything went very well with Janet. We were very polite and cultured when she first joined our company. But a few months later, there was a moment when I was telling a rather racy joke to some guys when Janet came into the room behind me to hear my rather vivid climax. The men around me noticed her, and everyone held their breath when I turned to see her shocked face. I smiled at her with a rather mischievous smile and said, Admit it, it's true and funny. She stood there for a moment, with an expression of, I can't believe this white boy just told me that, and then burst out laughing with me. From that moment on, she became one of the guys, but by the end of my date with her, she was a real woman. Janet allowed me to go further than on my other dates, and at the very last moment, I was the one who turned down her offer to stay the night, as much as I wanted to. There were problems with Linda that needed to be solved before I could sleep with another woman. Frank, Linda asked when I got into bed. Yes, Frank, I need you to take a shower. Why? It was dark. The lights were off, but Linda's voice was breaking. I could hear her sobbing. Please, Frank, if you don't take a shower, then I'll have to ask you to go to sleep in the guest room. I was confused. What's happening? I turned on the bedside lamp and saw my wife. Her face was red and her eyes were wet. She couldn't look me in the eye. Please, Frank, you can go back to our bed, but I'm asking you to please take a shower. What's wrong? I always take a shower in the morning. Darling, you know, that she turned away from me. She turned her whole body away from me. You smell like her. Ah, Janet. Scent was on me. Yes, I got out of bed. I felt lousy. I looked at her. She was still turned away from me. I'm sorry. I didn't understand. Listen, if you want me to go to the guest room, I can do it. No, she sobbed. I want you to come back to our bed. Frank, I can't stand the fact that someone's scent is on you. I just can't. I'm sorry. I want you in our bed. It's bad enough to know that you're dating others. I can pretend that you're hanging out with guys. I can ignore my friends telling me who they saw you with. I can even meet them like that Heather girl and tell myself that you're just friends. But now I know I can smell her. I can tell. I am. I want you to. Come back to our bed, but only after you take a shower. I can't stand the smell of her on you. I walked over to her side of the bed. I didn't linger. I bent down and kissed her on the forehead. I'm sorry. I wasn't very attentive. Let me take a shower and I'll go back to our bed. The next morning was Saturday and I overslept. It's been a long week for me. Going out every evening, I realized my age. I was hoping I wouldn't come down with a cold or something. Linda woke me up with breakfast. Then she asked me what my plans were. I don't have anything for the weekend, I told her. Frank, I was still sitting at the kitchen table. What? Frank. She reached into her pocket and pulled something out. She came up to me and knelt down in front of me. She opened her palm and inside I saw my wedding ring. Grabbing my hand, she looked up at me. Frank, I want to work on our marriage. I think maybe I didn't think everything through. She carefully began to put the ring on my finger. I let her. I still love you. She was on her knees waiting for me to say something. Finally, I spoke. Do you really feel that way? She nodded. No divorce. She nodded vigorously again. What about the other men? There is no one but you. That's it for you. Now there was the most delicate part. You'll all probably think I'm crazy about this, but I went ahead anyway. You have to understand that I will still date other women from time to time. Linda swallowed. We sat like this for a long time. Our eyes met each other. During this whole process, I learned something about my wife. I was sure of the outcome. Finally, she nodded. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised, she said. I think I'm in love with you too, I told her. I grabbed her and kissed her. I kissed her hard. She kissed me back. Linda, as it turned out, had low self-esteem. I treated her well. Well, not exactly like that. Over the years, we've grown apart. My biggest mistake was not to admit how she felt. Every time she told me about her feelings, I contradicted her. Do you know how harmful this is? How arrogant of someone to tell another person that what they feel is not true. All it did was accumulate resentment and hostility towards me and her. Over time, I got her to the point where she stopped appreciating what she had. Actually, maybe it's my fault, but over time we've changed. Well, she's changed. I've never changed. So why would I want to go back to who I was before? I played a hunch. She wanted me to come back, but we've both changed. Now she knew that there were others behind them. Scenes ready to replace her if she decided to go her own way. Do you have to date others? She whined. I'm not going to date other men. I looked at her and smiled. Yes, I will do it from time to time. You can be my wife, but I'm your husband. Don't forget about it, and I won't forget about you. She smiled. Yes, she smiled. Take me to bed and show me what I've been missing. Show me what all these other girls got from you. Do you think you have what I need? I asked. I'll just show you my love and maybe make you so tired that you won't have the strength for any other woman. I picked her up in my arms and carried her into the bedroom. I put her down on the bed and we both pulled off our clothes with a sense of urgency that was almost panicky. Our lust and passion exploded when I took her. Then she took me. Then she took me again. Somewhere along the way she realized from my stamina that I hadn't slept with any of the other women. 15 years later, my wife knows what I can do in bed. She had a knowing smile for the rest of the day. I didn't say anything. What happened on my dates was a topic that I didn't bring up. She didn't do it either. It was an episode in our lives that is best left in the past. For my part, I no longer asked her about the men she kissed and talked to. My wife now looks at me with a certain amount of awe and respect. I would never have believed that my plan would work. It wasn't a very good plan. At first, I was just too stubborn to give her the pleasure of seeing her destroy her husband with her hurtful words and asking for a divorce. When I saw how she reacted and accepted that I was dating other women while she stayed at home, waiting for me, I pushed my plan further. I won her back by pulling away from her. What you don't have, you want the most. What you have is the last thing you want. These are the words that I live by now. Having freed her and me, we are now more together than before. So do I date others? I haven't had to do this yet. The first sign that Linda is returning to her former state will lead to my next date. I know it. She knows this, and together we work together to not just listen to each other, but also to hear.